Okay, so we're going to begin this chapter one. This is micro and macroeconomics is the same chapter for the textbook that we're using. So we're going to start with chapter one, which is thinking like an economist. Now, when we say we're thinking like an economist, what we're really talking about is we're talking about things that involve scarcity, things that involve the cost-benefit principle. We're going to talk about how the cost-benefit principle is calculated, how we think about it. We're also going to talk about the incentive principle. The incentive principle is essentially this idea that economics is underlined by this idea that we have incentives that are in our self-interest to do things that are in our self-interest that we benefit from. Now, one of the things that we always talk about is that in economics, we are studying how people make choices under scarcity. So what is scarcity? Scarcity is essentially not having enough of everything that we might want. Wants are boundless. Needs are somewhat different. I would guess that we might disagree on what wants versus needs might be, but we certainly all have a list of wants. And if money were no object whatsoever, we would absolutely not have enough stuff in the world to satisfy all of our wants. So because we have limited resources called mostly money, we have to make choices. We have to say, I only have X amount of money. I have to make choices as it relates to the things that I want. We also have this idea of a no free lunch principle. That simply means that you may, for example, have been on campus in the fall or the spring where you were able to participate in maybe what would be called free food provided by the campus in the early days of the fall or the spring semester. Well, in fact, you know, by just thinking this through a little bit, that it's not free food. It's coming from fees. Certainly nobody provided those pizzas or sandwiches or drinks free of charge. Nobody said, I'll just do it for free. The college essentially takes some of your fees and applies those towards the purchase of these free, quote unquote, free lunches. And people show up and they get it and they think they're free. Well, they're free in that moment, but they're certainly not free in the sense that somebody had to produce those goods and services in order for you to enjoy them. And that was not free. So scarcity is involved in everything. There's scarcity of potable water, there's scarcity of food, there's scarcity of space, money, there's all kinds of scarcity. Now let's talk about the next component, and this is one that a lot of people might confuse on the test, but it's this idea of the cost-benefit principle. When we're talking about costs in economics, we're talking about marginal cost most of the time. What's the marginal cost? What are the marginal benefits? What are the extra benefits that would be marginal? What are the extra that would be marginal costs? So costs and benefits, though, are not just measured in terms of money. There's costs in terms of time, in terms of whether you liked something or not, how much enjoyment you get. In economics, we refer to that as utility. So we're not talking solely about money. And so essentially, a rational person is going to think about how they want to spend their limited resources and make some decisions based on what the marginal or extra costs are versus the marginal or extra benefits. So let's assume people are rational. A rational person in economics is someone that has well-defined goals and tries to fulfill those goals as best they can. So rather than me ask you a question related to would you walk to town to save $10 on an item. Let's actually run a scenario here. Suppose that this class required special software that you could only purchase at the college bookstore for $100, or my store, yes, my little special store in downtown Oklahoma City for $50. Where would you buy the special software? And why? I'll let you think about that. Now think about it again, but this time think about it in terms of, suppose that the software required a special netbook that sells for $1,000 at the college bookstore and $950 at Dawkins discount software store downtown Oklahoma City. So where would you buy the special netbook and why? Now think about that. Now let me say that if you would have said you would have driven downtown to save the $50 in the first scenario, you should have said that you would have driven downtown to save the $50 in the second scenario. Why? Well, because it's $50, and if it doesn't cost you more than $50 to go downtown, then you should absolutely drive downtown to save the money. But some of you might have thought, well, sure, I'll go ahead and do it on the first one. I'm not going to do it on the second one, because your brain did this little functioning error. It said, basically, I'm saving half price on the first one, but on the second one, well, I'm only saving 5%. Now, maybe you didn't do the calculation, but it's 5%. So your mind might have said, well, I'm going to just go to the bookstore and buy it there. But the truth is, if you would have gone downtown with the first scenario, you should have gone downtown for the second scenario. Now, let's talk about that you clip grocery coupons, but somehow Bill and Melinda Gates don't. The question would be, why would that be the case? Well, certainly Bill and Melinda Gates, they're billionaires. The time that they spend clipping coupons would seem a bit odd, given that their time is certainly worth more than the time it would take them to find the coupon, go get some scissors, and cut out the coupon. Now, can you imagine you're the chef in their kitchen in their big mansion there in Washington State in Seattle, and Melinda or Bill comes in and says, hey, the next time you go to the store, would you mind using these coupons? I might wonder whether I'm going to be getting paid on Friday, right? Why would Bill and Melinda Gates be worrying about coupons when they have billions of dollars? So it would be rational then for you to clip coupons because you're not a billionaire. Now, maybe you're wealthy enough that you don't have to worry about clipping coupons. But for you to spend time clipping coupons would mean that you find some value in saving money that it exceeds the time it takes for you to find the coupons and cut them out and then make arrangements to save them. Now, the next one is you speed on the way to work, but not on the way to school. Well, what's up with that? Well, you might say, well, I speed on the way to work because if I'm late, I'll get in trouble, or I might get fired, or, there could be any number of bad things that might happen as a result of me getting to work late. But with school, the costs of being late are not generally as high as the costs of being late at a job. So it does make some sense that you would speed on the way to work, but not on the way to school. Okay, so let's talk about this. It's the bottom of the seventh inning. The score is tied, and the bases are full, and the count's 3-2, and there's 2 outs. And you are suddenly overwhelmed by the thirst for a nice beer. And so I guess the question would be, do you go out at that time and go up to the galley where all of the vendors are so that you can go buy your beer, or do you buy it and spend a little extra from the hawker in the stand who is selling it for just a little bit more than the price it would be upstairs. Well, if you follow baseball and you understand the rules of it, you probably would not walk upstairs because you would miss the play. You would miss whatever's going to happen. If score's tied and the bases are loaded and there's 2 outs and the count's 3-2, that's probably one of those times where you just don't want to walk away from the game. So you would probably, I'm going to guess, you would probably spend a little extra from the hawker in the stand. And then the last one is you skip your regular dental checkup. Now, some people say, well, I just don't like dentists, so I'm going to skip it as many times as I can. But in reality, people that would go to the dentist are essentially saying it's not worth the extra time and cost for me to go to the dentist to get my teeth cleaned or whatever, to get my teeth checked every 6 months. So I'm going to wait till there's a problem whenever I'm more motivated to go to the dentist, and then that's when you go. So it does make some sense that you might skip your regular dental checkup because you're weighing the costs and the benefits, or the marginal cost versus the marginal benefits. Remember, the extra cost versus the extra benefits. And so you can rationally decide, yeah, I can still eat, my teeth are fine, I'm just going to skip it and wait. That would be rational. Now let's talk about economic surplus. Now, economic surplus is something that all companies seek. All companies seek to have economic surplus because what that means literally is that they are dedicating their time and effort and money to the highest reward available to them. And so when we think about economic surplus, we're basically thinking about it in terms of what's the maximum value of something relative to the price that I actually pay. And by the way, this could change. Let's just take the example of a simple 16-ounce bottle of water. So you might say, well, the most I would pay for a 16-ounce bottle of water is $2. But what if you're in the desert and you've walked for 30 miles? Well, the conditions would change, right? The conditions that would cause you to demand water are different after you've been in the desert walking for 30 miles than if you were in a circumstance where you were just buying a bottle of water in the event that you get thirsty at some point. So there are conditions around it, but you do have a maximum price you'd be willing to pay. Now, if you pay less than the maximum amount, then we're going to say that you have economic surplus. The thing about economic surplus in a market economy is that buyers and sellers both can have surplus. You might be willing to pay more than what you paid, so therefore you have surplus, and the seller might have been willing to sell it for less than what they sold it for, therefore the seller has surplus. So in a free market, it's not a winner-take-all type of thing. It can be essentially that both parties can have economic surplus, and that'd be a win-win for both buyers and sellers. So in this case, if we get $10 of savings from walking to town, and our costs of walking to town are $9, then our economic surplus from walking downtown is just the difference. 10 minus 9 is $1. Now let's talk about opportunity cost. Opportunity cost means whatever else you would be doing at this moment in time that you're sitting in front of your computer screen looking at this video, whatever else you would be doing is an opportunity cost to what you're doing at this moment. Now, I can assure you that while I'm doing this video right now, if me doing this video right now meant that I would miss a $10,000 payday out there in the real world, I can assure you that I would not be doing this video at this moment in time. I would pick another time to do it. Why? Because as much as I like to do this video and give you all an advance chance to get started on the course, I just not worth 10 grand to me. I can wait. I've got other ways to do this, right? So opportunity cost is what you give up and the value of that for what you choose to do. And so in economics, we always want to be doing the thing that benefits us the most in the time that we're doing it. And we don't just consider the explicit cost, but we also consider the implicit costs. And the implicit cost means that there's things involved that are not explicit in terms of money out of my pocket. It could be waiting in line. It could be that I have a business opportunity and I understand the explicit cost of it, but I don't understand the implicit cost of it. And so therefore I might make a bad decision. Now let's talk about this opportunity cost in terms of a few examples. The first one here is you want to go to a Chicago Earth, Wind, and Fire concert at the Zoo Amphitheater. The cost of the concert is $62 per ticket. The concert is on a Wednesday evening. If you go to the concert, you will lose the opportunity to earn $50 helping your uncle put up a fence. So what is the opportunity cost of buying the concert ticket and going to the concert? Well, there's two ways to look at it. The first way to look at it is if you're willing to help your uncle for free, then essentially what you're giving up is the $50. But if you're not willing to help your uncle for free, then what you're giving up is the $62 and the $50, and that is what we would define as a strict definition of opportunity cost. Now we're going to do another one here. So let's assume that you have a travel voucher that's worth $500 that expires November 1st. Now your friends come to you and they say, hey, we want to go to Fort Lauderdale and we want you to come with us. And oh, by the way, we know you've got this voucher worth $500, so it wouldn't even cost you to go to Fort Lauderdale and join us while we're having all this fun. Now the flight is $500. The room and board and other activities when you get to Fort Lauderdale is $1,000. So if we don't use the voucher, the total cost would be $1,500. At least the nominal cost, right, would be $1,500. Now, here's another thing. The reason why you got the voucher is because in October, your brother's getting married and you have to go to the wedding and you don't have a choice in this. You've got to be there. Now, the flight for this is $400. Now, for the sake of this example, let's assume that the voucher is non-refundable, meaning that if the cost is $400, you don't get an extra $100. That it's a use or lose. $500, you gotta use it one time. So if it's $400, you don't get any change. So when you go to your brother's wedding, that's $400. The room and board and other activities is $0. And so if you were just going to pay for this trip to Fort Lauderdale out of pocket without regard to the travel voucher, then you would value the trip at $1,350. That's the most you'd be willing to pay. And economics refer to that as your reservation price. That's the highest price you're willing to pay. So you can't miss the wedding in Boston. So the question is, what should you do? So the economic surplus to go into Fort Lauderdale, you valued at $1,350. The cost of the trip using the voucher is $1,000, which seems to mean the economic surplus would be $350. So it seems like you're okay. Except there's an implicit cost associated with using the voucher to go to Fort Lauderdale, and that's the $400 that you're going to have to pay. So the $400 minus $350 means that you're in the hole. $1,400 is greater than $1,350, so that's $50 too much. So guess what? A rational person will not go to Fort Lauderdale. Now, if you got any questions about this, be sure and ask in class because it's important that you understand this example. So let's talk about economic models. All economists, for whatever reason, are imposed upon to somehow predict the future. That we are supposed to predict the future because we're economists, and somehow we have a crystal ball that everybody is supposed to depend on us to tell them what's going to happen. But the fact is that economic models are very limited, and you can only know what you know based on the quality of the information that is provided. So whenever we use economic models, we're basically making a best guess using the available data. And the data is always flawed. You never have all the information, and you never know exactly what's going to happen. At the time I'm doing this recording, it just so happened that Notre Dame in France, in Paris, it burned. It burned really badly, and they were kind of trying to restore it. They were trying to maintain it, and perhaps that's what caused the fire. But unless you knew this fire was going to happen, then your model, your economic model, would be potentially off for the city of Paris if you were trying to predict what kind of economic activity is going to occur. Certainly different kinds of economic activity are going to occur as they try to rebuild and restore that building, that structure. But, you know, what will be the impact on tourism? What will be the impact on the amount of labor that's being used to restore that building? These are all questions that, unless you had it in your economic model, there's really no way to predict that. So the same thing's true whenever there was a tsunami that knocked a nuclear power plant off grid in Japan a few years ago. Yes, it mostly affected Japan, but it had a worldwide impact because it took out a huge area of production that in Japan that provides parts and components to final goods elsewhere. So it took a while to relocate all that manufacturing. So again, economic models are basically an abstract relationship that tries to say, based on what we have currently, this is what we see in terms of the economy. Now, just because it doesn't necessarily perfectly work because of these things that I just described, the Paris fire and the Japanese tsunami, doesn't mean that these models are without benefit or merit. Imagine that you're a coffee producer and you are producing coffee to consumers in grocery stores. And let's say you find out that one of your chief competitors has determined that they were going to increase their prices significantly in the next month. But your cost structure, at least as it stands today, you have no plans of increasing your costs or your prices. So in such a circumstance, the question would be, what's likely to happen in this scenario? Well, if your competitor increases the price, there's going to be some brand switching, and your brand is going to benefit from that. So you could plug in an economic model that uses historic and current information to determine how much extra coffee or coffee beans are going to have to be ordered, how many more packages are going to have to be ordered, how much more distribution are you going to have to plan for, how many more shifts are you going to have to use in order to produce this extra coffee. And so these models can be helpful to determine how much more inputs you need to get the increased production that you might need because of brand shifting. Now, there are three decision pitfalls, and we're going to talk about them. And then I'm also going to have another video that I'll probably have you watch, maybe a couple, which will kind of outline some of these. Now, the first one is measuring costs and benefits as proportions instead of absolute dollar amounts. So if you were in the circumstance where you were saying before that you wouldn't go downtown to save the $50 in one scenario, but you would in the other, when both were saving $50, this is an example of that. You'll find this a lot of time people shopping. So if I buy this, this is 50% off. But if I buy this other one, it's only 10% off. So I'm going to buy this one. But that kind of is cloudy thinking because it's really the absolute dollar amounts that you're saving, not the proportions or percentages. The second one is also an important one, and that's ignoring implicit costs. Many people do not know, and certainly some do, that the creator of the personal computer was no brand that you currently have heard of. A lot of people will say Apple, but Apple did not create the personal computer. Xerox did. And you've never seen a Xerox personal computer because they haven't made any. And the question is, well, how did that happen? How is it that Xerox was responsible for the creation of the personal computer, and yet there's no Xerox computers? The answer to that is that they basically gave away, they didn't even patent the work that the researchers did in creating what they thought might be the future office. Remember, Xerox is a printer company. They make a lot of printers. And I'm sure in the year that they basically gave Steve Jobs and his engineering staff all of their unpatented research, there was a really good copier that year that came out. Might have been state of the art. But imagine what it might have cost in the end of all this for Xerox to not exploit the value of what they had created, which was a personal computer. Everything, they could have owned the personal computer industry. They could have owned it. And yet they gave it away because they really didn't understand the costs of spending more money in research to continue along the lines of making the personal computer. It's an amazing story, and I will attach a video for you to watch. And the third one is failure to think at the margin, marginal costs, marginal benefits. That's another pitfall in thinking. So we're going to go through that. The Xerox, that's a very interesting thing. And that link, by the way, may or may not be good. I'll have to check it. But I'll have one for you. Okay, now, the question is, should you go to the Thunder game? This is an example of thinking at the margin. Or really opportunity cost, implicit cost. So scenario one, a ticket scalper approaches you and offers you 2 courtside seats for $1,000 per ticket. It's game 7 of the finals. Do you pay for the tickets and go to the game? That's a yes or a no. I'll let you consider that. The second scenario, a wealthy corporate donor gives your parents 2 courtside seats worth $1,000 per ticket. They hate crowds, so they give you the tickets. Do you go to the game? Okay, consider your answer there. Now, here's the thing. If you said no to the first one, and if you said yes to the second one, then you are engaged in a pitfall, a thinking pitfall. Why? Well, if you were not willing to take $1,000 out of your pocket per ticket, $2,000, to purchase these tickets to go to Game 7 of the NBA Finals, then you should also not be willing to do it in scenario 2. Why? It costs you $1,000 per ticket in scenario 2, just like it would cost you $1,000 per ticket in scenario 1. But you're saying, but that's not true. My parents gave me the tickets. Well, that's true. In this case, you had to pull $1,000 a ticket out of your pocket. In this case, you just didn't receive $1,000 per ticket you could have sold them for. So in both cases, it cost you $1,000. But in the first case, it cost you out of your pocket. In the second case, it cost you the opportunity to earn that. So that's an implicit cost. That's essentially what Xerox did whenever they did not take advantage of the personal computer. So let's talk about sunk cost. Sunk cost is a cost that cannot be redeemed at the moment a decision, or redeemed or recovered at the moment a decision has to be made. So you can think about sunk cost as, it uses an example here of eating all you can eat restaurants where you pay out one price and you eat all you can eat. People would tend to overeat, and the reason is you're trying to maximize how much you paid to eat. So you basically have sunk costs, though. I mean, you should eat until you're full and then stop. But people tend to want to maximize that, so because they've already paid. But there's other things. There's other ways to think about sunk cost. If there is a investment that you've put money into, or research and development that you've put money into, and you have not, it has not uncovered whatever solution you wish to uncover, or has resulted in whatever benefit you wish to seek. It's not a good reason to continue doing it simply because you put money into it that you can't get out of it, and you would just keep putting money into it for that purpose. Not a good idea. Another good example of this would be, hopefully this isn't the case, but during this course, there'll be a point in time where you'll have a drop date where you could withdraw. And so the question would be, should you, in the course of taking this class, if you were to decide I'm thinking I might need to drop this class, would the smart way to think about it be that, well, I've spent all this time, effort, and money on this class so far, so I can't afford to drop now. I just can't afford to do that. Well, you can't recover any of the costs associated with the class. You've already paid. You can't get that money back. So if you focus on the monies that have been spent, what you're doing is engaging in a pitfall, because really what should be in your mind would be not, I've spent too much money, therefore I can't drop, but what's my grade going to be if I stay in? If I flunk, if I stay in because of this money I wish to avoid losing, we call this loss aversion, by the way, and it's a pitfall in thinking, then you made the bad decision because you ended up flunking the class. That's not the thing to do. Don't flunk the class, just withdraw and then try again. And this is an example of what I just talked about. So we've got marginal costs, marginal benefits, average costs, average benefits, and these are things that we're going to talk about as we go along the course. Let's look at SpaceX here, and this is just a number of launches, 0 through 5. Total cost is listed here. If we don't launch it, 0. If we launch 5 times, it's combined total cost of $32 billion. Now, in this process, there's average cost. Average cost is simply taking the total cost and dividing it by the number of launches. That's how you get to 5 billion per launch, is because it's 4 launches, it's 20 billion, that's 5 billion average. But average will lead you to make some bad decisions. If we look at the marginal cost is placed kind of in an odd place. You'll notice that 3 is located kind of in the middle, 4 is kind of in the middle. What marginal cost tells us is how much marginal benefit we receive by engaging in 1 launch. Well, that's 3 billion. That's the difference between 0 and 3. 0 and 3. If we launch twice, it says it's marginal cost of 4 billion. Well, that's the difference between 3 and 7. And of course, the 2 to 3 would be 5, and 3 to 4 would be 8, and then 4 to 5 would be 12. An extra 12 billion in marginal cost. Now, if we're only benefiting $6 billion per launch, you might be tempted to look at this column and go, well, let's launch 4 times, since on average it's only costing us $5 billion. But the reality is that's a bad decision. Why? Well, the marginal cost of the 4th launch is $8 billion. You would literally be saying, I'm willing to spend $8 billion in launch, in cost to launch, even though I'm only going to benefit $6 billion. So the rational decision would be, marginal cost is $5 billion. We would stop at 3 launches. We would not do the 4th one. And in this scenario, we would ignore the average cost. We would only focus on the marginal cost. Now, in this course, we're going to talk about economics in several different ways. Normative basically says how people should behave. We're going to talk about things sometimes that will be advocating a certain perspective, talking about how some might see certain issues related to economic issues, which is almost everything. And then positive economic analysis is basically saying, here's what's likely to occur if something happens, and as a consequence of that, this would likely be the outcome. So if I said for every 10% increase in the minimum wage, there will be an increase in unemployment among teens by 2%. That's a positive economic statement. Now, if I said something like it's unacceptably, it's unacceptable for the government to raise the minimum wage by 10% when it will increase unemployment among teens by 2%. Sounds very similar. But in the second time, I was actually saying it's a bad decision. We probably shouldn't do that. And so that would be a normative versus positive statement. So microeconomics, it studies individual buyers and sellers and what motivates those individual markets. In macroeconomics, we're studying the big picture, big macro data, what I refer to as aggregate data. The aggregate is total. And so we'll be looking at aggregate data with macroeconomics. And so basically, we're going to build on this chapter for the rest of the class. And so we'll cover some of these issues in class in the first chapter, and then we'll go from there. I hope you've enjoyed the first chapter, and I hope that you come to class having already watched this, so when I start lecturing in chapter 2, you'll be ready to roll. You have a great day, and I can't wait to see you in class.